Всем привет! Сегодня вторая встреча нашего книжного клуба. Вчера поговорили про domain-driven дизайн, обсудили его аспекты применения, подискутировали, получилось горячо. Сегодня второй день Russian Python Week подходит к концу, но я вас приветствую на нашей активности. Книжный клуб продолжается. Сегодня хотим поговорить о другой книге, известной довольно в мире Python-разработки. Сегодня поговорим о книге Fluent Python. У нас сегодня в гостях автор этой книги Luciano Ramalho. Мы хотим с ним обсудить его книгу. Он расскажет об основных идеях из тех, для тех, кто не читал, для тех, кто читал, поможет обсудить, ответить на вопросы и расскажет о новой редакции, которая готовится скоро выйти в свет. Hi, Luciano. Can you hear me?
Yes. Thank you so much, Slava.
How do you do today?
I am fine. It's a bit hot here in São Paulo, Brazil, where I am. It's about 27 degrees, even though it's winter. It's crazy.
It is sunny today, right?
Yes, it's sunny.
Okay. Luciano, автор книги Fluent Python, в том числе изданной на русском языке, помимо 9 других языков, на котором она вышла. Сегодня мы хотим чуть глубже погрузиться в эту книгу, да, поговорить непосредственно с автором. So, Luciano, let's talk about your book.
Yes. Thank you very much. So I got the Russian edition here.
Oh, great.
Yes. The publisher sent me all the translations. There are 8 translations. There was the original in English plus 8 translations. And so, yeah, now I'm working on the second edition, and I think I have 2 major updates for the second edition. There's changes in every chapter, but the main changes have to do with the updating of the async.io examples, because when I wrote the book, async.io had a provisional API. So it was part of the standard library, but they said that the API could change, and it did change. So that's actually the only examples in the first edition that don't work anymore are the examples about using async.io. And the other major change that's bigger actually, it's the introduction of type hints, which happened in Python 3.5. Python 3.5 was not released when I wrote the first edition. And so now the biggest chapter in the second edition is an introduction to type hints that has 60 pages. It's the biggest chapter in the book. I haven't finished the second edition yet, but I hope that will be the biggest chapter. I don't want to write another chapter that's so big. Yeah. Are you a fan of type hints, Slava?
Yes, of course. I am fan.
Well, what I think about type hints is that they are not for everybody. And we have to remember that the Python community is very diverse. For instance, I know in the previous talk, sometimes I don't understand any Russian, sorry, but sometimes I hear English terms being used, right? So in the previous talk, they were talking about machine learning or data science. And that's probably the biggest vector of growth for Python. And we I guess you are a software engineer. I'm a software engineer as well. I work for a software consultancy, ThoughtWorks. So we develop software that has to, operate for many years in a corporate environment with teams that come and go, different people. So in this context, we have two things that are extremely valuable: automated tests and type hints, right? And type hints complement, they don't replace tests, but they complement. They catch some bugs that tests have more difficulty catching, and vice versa. But the thing is, we have to recognize as a community that Python is used by a lot of people who are not software engineers, who are physicists, who are biologists, who are researchers in social science, in digital humanities. So there's people, and also there are kids learning to program with Python. For all of those communities, I am the benefits of automated testing and type hints are not the same that they are for us. So so that's my main message about type hints. I am not against type hints, but I think we have to understand that we shouldn't push, we shouldn't force people to use type hints just because we think it's a best practice. Best practice for who?
That's the question.
Exactly. That's the most important thing. So I have a short story. Volleyball. I used to work for another company where we had a party at the end of the year, and the company rented a ranch that had a swimming pool that had, we were doing barbecue, and there was lots of beer, and then people playing games, and somebody invited me to go play volleyball. And I said, oh, I don't know, play volleyball, I'm not very good at it. Oh, don't worry, nobody knows how to play. So we just need one more person to complete a team, 6 and 6. So, okay, so I went there, and it was interesting because the other team had 2 guys who knew how to play very well. And my team had only 1 guy who knew how to play well, okay? And everybody else was, different levels, but nobody really knew how to play very well except these 3 people. So what happened was, the people who knew how to play, they wanted to play volleyball like the pros. How does a professional team play volleyball, right? I remember Russia has a very strong national volleyball team, right? I remember that Brazil and Russia played in the past. Anyway, so how do they play? Somebody serves, and then the other team, somebody receives, and then passes to somebody in the middle, who then passes to somebody in the net, who then, hits to the other side, right? So each team is taking advantage of all the 3 touches that they have the right to do, right? And that's how the captain of my team and the captain of the other team wanted to play. But we were playing terribly. So we started to lose. And then I told my team, we should stop trying to pretend that we are pros, because we are not. So each time we try to pass from one to the other inside our team, most of the time we are dropping the ball. So what we should do is start playing like we played when I was in middle school, which is when the ball comes to your side, you just throw it to the other side. That's it, And we started doing that, and we won the game, And why is that? It was because the tactics was more appropriate. It wasn't the best practice, but it was more appropriate to the team that we had. You know?
It was appropriate for you
Exactly.
and your guys.
Exactly. So anyway, that's the little story. But one thing that I would like to, I tweeted some. There was times when I was a little bit irritated with type hints, because, you know, lots of peps. Last time I counted, there were 17 peps about type hints. No part of Python has 17 peps. No part of Python has even 5 peps, you know. And the peps in the typing system are difficult to read, right? Because they introduce concepts that a lot of people in the Python community, including me, never had to deal with before. You know, like covariance, contravariance, things like that. A type erasure, you know. So, but then I started, you know, studying it to write the second edition of the book, and I started getting excited about it. You know, I started enjoying seeing how to do annotations, but particularly I want to share with you and the Russian Python community what I think is the most important feature that came out with type hints after the initial release of type hints in Python 3.5, and that was the protocols that was added in 3.8, right? Typing protocols. And so I would like to show an example that I'm developing for the book. Can I show it?
Yes, you can, sure.
So I'm going to share the screen. I think maybe this is the button. No, this. Yeah, okay. There we go. All right. Can you see the screen? You have to switch over there.
Yes, yes. Now we can see. It's okay.
All right. This is a very nice system you have. So this is just the cover of the second edition.
Oh, great.
Yeah. It's the same lizard with a different cover. And they said that it's going to be colorized when the final edition comes. Anyway, so the example, and let me share with you.
We're looking forward to it. Yes, now we can see.
Yeah. Let me, I'm going to increase the font, close this here. But let me share with you guys, I am developing this in the open, sort of, not completely, but mostly in the open. So let me show you. GitHub.com/Fluent Python is the organization that I created, and protocol examples is where the examples that I'm going to show you here are going to be. Okay. So let me just see. Okay. So this is a good example that I want to start with. So in the first edition of the book, I had an example, which is a vector class, okay? And this is the code from the first edition. Okay, so it supports A vector is a collection of integers, of floats, and you can build from bytes. You can it behaves as a sequence, and it supports slicing. And this is actually only the second version of the example. The example evolves in the book to show even more functionality. But let me show you one part that changed from the first edition to the second edition. Okay, so the method dunder get item, right? This method here is the method that you need to implement to support bracket access, right? And to support bracket access, you get a key, and then you test whether it's a slice. You have to have some behavior, because what's the example here? If I have a vector and I pass a slice in the brackets, the result is going to be another vector, right? But if I pass an int, then the result is going to be just one float, the float in that position, right? So this is the code that was in the first edition. And it's a little bit ugly because it has two is-instance tests, right? The first one is to test whether the key is a slice. If the key is a slice, then I can I create another instance, right? Here I get the class of the vector itself, right? I did this in this way because that way, if I subclass this vector class, then get item will work with the subclass, right? Because I did not hard code the class that I'm building. I'm taking the class of the instance, and then I use this CLS here, the class of the instance, to build the new instance that's going to be returned from the slice, right? So if the slice, if the key is a slice, then I can just use the slice to get the parts of the components, which is actually an array of floats, right? So I get the same slice of the components, and then I build another instance of the vector class and return that. Okay. Otherwise, I need to test whether the value looks like an index, you know? And the way I did it in the first edition was to use numbers.integral, right? So there is the numbers package in the standard library that has abstract classes for numbers that are more generic than just int, right? Because int is just int. But if you use NumPy, NumPy supports several other ints, right? 8-bit ints, 16-bit, 32-bit ints, 64-bit ints. And anyway, so this is a way of making sure that this will work with any kind of int that is passed as an argument, right? And then if that's the case, then I return the specific component at that position. Otherwise, I have to raise an exception saying that indices must be integers, okay? Now I'm gonna show the second version of this. The second version, which is already in the second edition, is much better. But I'm gonna do a diff. I think I already have a diff here, yes. Okay.
Let's see.
So what changed? First of all, the second version is shorter, which is good. It's not, it's as correct as in fact, it's more correct than the first one. Why? Okay, so the first part is the same, right? Because I have to, well, it's not the same, it's similar. In this case, I only get the class inside the if tests for the slice, because I'm not going to use it anywhere else, right? So this part is similar. I get the class of the instance, and then I build a new instance using that slice. Now, the last part is much better. So it turns out that the people who created NumPy, they lobbied the Python community years ago to have a special dunder method called dunder index. Okay, so dunder index is to support indexing operations, right? So the Python int class supports dunder index, and all the other integer classes of NumPy also support it. But float doesn't, which is very important, because you don't want to use a float as an index. That would be, very strange and ambiguous, So the way to use it using duct typing is this. There is no built-in index function, but there is an index function in the operator module. So I use that to convert the key to an index. And this operator index, what it does is to get the value returned by dunder index, right? And if the object doesn't support it, it gives you a nice readable explanation, right? So if this here doesn't work, the exception that will be raised automatically is already informative. Let me show you, because I have duct tests here. Doc tests that show. So see, the error message for the previous version was this: vector indices must be integers, and here I say tuple object cannot be interpreted as an integer. It's okay. I guess the older error message was better, but this one is not too bad, because it's obvious if the person called like this, she was passing a tuple, and so it's obvious that's the problem, right? Anyway, and this is an example of duct typing, right? Which is avoiding the use of his instance. The use of his instance for the slice is kind of inevitable in this example, and it's the best practice. But for the index, you don't need to use a test like that, because you can use the operator index function, and it will work to convert the index, or it won't, and then it will give a nice error message, right? So that's a very good example of duct typing. And I'm a big fan of duct typing, and we have to recognize that duct typing is part of Python, is part of Ruby, is part of Smalltalk, and is part of JavaScript. And it's part of even Lisp, and Scheme. So there's lots of languages that use duct typing, and it's not a defect. It's just a characteristic, right? It has advantages and disadvantages. The code that I wrote in the first edition was kind of doing a little bit of static type checking in a dynamic language, right? Because I was using his instance here, right? Anyway, so now I'm going to show you.
That was good example, Luciano. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to show you how to do that correctly with type hints, taking advantage of protocols, right? Because, if somebody was looking at this the first edition code it would be natural to say that the key would be an union of slice and int, right? Because I'm testing whether it's a slice or an integral. I can't really use an integral with type hints because for some reason that I still don't understand completely, I understand partially, they don't want to support the numeric tower, the numbers packaging, MyPy, and other static type checkers. Okay? So anyway, how do I do that using the best practice of today? Wait, I have to take the... yeah, okay. That's weird. I thought I had already edited this, but it's okay. I'm going to do it right now. Oh, I did it actually already. So this is the type hints for, if I want to type hints this whole class, this is how I type hint the underget item, right? So I have to use overload because why can't I just use a union? The union would be okay to check the argument, the key argument, but it would not be okay to solve the problem of the return value, right? And I could use an union in the return value, but that's not recommended, right? There's a very famous rule. I think it's one of the most important rules that I learned in systems programming, which is Postel's law, right? By John Postel, one of the architects of the internet. So he used to say that you have to be, I forgot the exact words, but it's like this. You have to be tolerant with what you receive and strict with what you return. So for instance, you should try to accept interfaces, ABCs, as the types of your parameters, so that the caller can give you arguments of different types as long as they comply with the interface that you specified in the ABC, right? But for the return value, you should use concrete types as much as possible, because you know what you're returning, so it's nice for the user that you tell them, this is what I'm returning, and not just a union or something, right? So the best way in this case to annotate is, for the first case is, I have to say something. Usually the self argument is not annotated by convention, right? Because the self argument is assumed to be of the type of the class. So you usually don't annotate it. But sometimes you do, for this example here, to do a type var. Because what I want is, I want to say that in the slice, in the slice overload, what happens is, given that self is an instance of a type T, the return value will be of the same type T, right? If it's a vector, it's going to be a vector, right? So this is why I need the T here, right? And here is just slice. So does that make sense? Do you think it's, Slava, do you think it would be good for me to explain overloads? Maybe.
I think basically our audiences understand what is overloads.
Yeah, okay, good. All right. So the second version of overload here is the one that's interesting, because I don't want to use numbers integral. It's not supported by MyPy, etc. It's not. I don't want to use int because I want to be more flexible. So the correct solution is to use supports index. And where is that? I'm going to show you the documentation for that. So I want to show. I'm super happy that I made a contribution to the typing documentation. So this is the typing documentation for version 3.8. And it's very complete, it's very good, but there's one little problem, which is this. This section, called classes, functions, and decorators, is huge. And it's not ordered alphabetically. The ordering is difficult to understand, and there's no subsections. So the contribution that I did under the supervision of Guido, I was super happy that he came to help, was this. So module contents now has different sections. For instance, building generic types, other special directives, generic concrete collections, right? So now it's divided in sections that are easier to understand. And then I also added a lot of comments about deprecations, right, that are going to be happening starting with Python 3.9, because many of the built-in types and standard library types that were not generic, now in Python 3.9 they become generic, so you don't need to import a lot of stuff from typing, which is great. Anyway, what I wanted to show was support. See? This is also an addition that I put here, that this comment that these protocols are runtime checkable. And so supports index is basically a protocol, because these are all protocols. And I'm going to show how to create a protocol soon. But first, I want to, it's the same thing that I always say when I talk about interfaces or ABCs, that first of all, we should all become heavy users of existing protocols and ABCs before inventing our own, right? Because there's a temptation to start creating lots of ABCs and protocols, and that becomes a lot of over-engineering, right? And it's better to really understand and use the built-in ones instead of creating lots of new ones. But anyway, so supports index is basically a protocol that says anything that implements dunder index is consistent with this type. That's what a protocol does. So the protocol in Python 3.8 is a new mechanism that Python did not have for static type checking before, which is called structural type checking, which is a type satisfies one of these protocols as long as it implements the methods, the named methods, with the correct signature. You don't need to declare anywhere that you support index, you just implement. I don't know how many of your audience, of you, Slava, have played with Go, but this is exactly the idea of interfaces in Go, which you declare the interface, and the declaration is basically saying the methods of the interface. But then when you implement an interface, you don't need to say that you are implementing it. The compiler automatically knows that you are implementing it, right? Because when you pass one of your objects as argument to a function, so in this example here, what's happening here is that, here. As long as the key is an object that implements dunder index, it passes this check, right? So I think this is a a good example of using supports index.
Right.
One of those protocols, not just
Luciano. Thanks
right?
For your sharing.
Yeah.
I'd like to move toward discussing your book and
Awesome.
to questions from
Yes,
our
that's
audience. The first question is Kira is asking, how do you what do you think about translations of your book and quality of these translations?
well, about the Russian translation, I have to ask you.
What do we think about translations, right?
Of the Russian translation, because let me tell you what I know about it. I only read fluently English and Portuguese, which is my native language. And I know a little bit of Spanish, but there is no Spanish translation of my book. So I wrote the book in English, and but here in Brazil, there are several publishers, but I know one publisher who is a very high quality publisher, and I went to him. I knew him because we worked together many years ago, and I said, please translate my book. Because there is another publisher that I'm not going to mention. The publisher that translated my book is a publisher called Novatec. Novatec is great, and so they translated my book. I reviewed the translation, and the translation was already good. I fixed a few mistakes, and the translation in Portuguese is great. But I did that because as somebody who has lots of books that are translations from English, I know that translations can be bad, right? And I want to ask you, the Russian community, you can write to me. My email is luciano@ramalho.org. If you have complaints about the Russian translation, please let me know, because I don't know Russian, so I can't evaluate. But I would like to lobby O'Reilly to tell the publishers to do a better job, because the book has been a success. Everybody that translated it made money. Okay?
Okay. So, Кира, отвечая на ваш вопрос, Luciano советует о любых ошибках или каких-то недочетах писать напрямую ему, и он выступает за то, чтобы все эти исправления попадали в печатную версию, да, потому что для него это важно. So, Luciano, connected question. How do you like translated name of the book for Russian version? It's more like Python to the heights of excellence in Russian.
Yeah. I know. I met. Who was it? I think it was. I think it was Yuri Selivanov. I'm a big fan of Yuri because of his work with the Sync.io, and I met him at PyCon, I think it was last year, and I asked him to what he thought of, to say the name of the book, and then he said, and I said, why so many words? Oh yeah, because they didn't translate exactly, and I don't know. I think it's okay. I don't know if they didn't like to say fluent, or what would be a more literal translation. Do you talk about, for instance, what's the expression that you use when you say, I don't know, maybe let's talk about Nikita. Nikita speaks fluent German. How do you say that? What's that word?
What's that exact word we use in Russian?
Fluent. Yeah, so yeah.
Свободно, быстро.
Yeah, so maybe the book could be called
Свободный питон.
Yes, good.
Great.
I like it. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Luciano. Another question. How did you get an idea to write this book?
That's a good question. I love programming, and I also love teaching. And then I learned Python 20 years ago, and I taught Python to many programmers. And sometimes they were intermediate courses for people who were already using Python, but to learn more about the language. And what I discovered was that because Python is very easy to learn, sometimes people don't even read the whole tutorial. I bet you there's a lot of people in the world who makes a lot of money programming Python who have never read the entire Python tutorial. And so, okay, they use the language, they learn somehow, but sometimes when you read people's code, you realize that they are programming in a language that is not exactly Python. It's Python, but with a little bit of a Java influence, or it's Python with a little bit of a, Ruby influence, whatever, So I then created a course that was called Python for people who knows Python. And then I also gave a lot of talks about intermediate Python, talking about this idea of idiomatic Python, how to do things in the Python way. And that's how the book was born, because I realized that after teaching a lot of those subjects, I had a lot of ideas for a book. And so in 2013, I went to OSCON. I was a speaker at OSCON 2013 in Portland, Oregon, in the United States. And OSCON was a conference organized by O'Reilly, right? So O'Reilly had a booth there. And I went to their booth and said, I have this idea for a book that's an intermediate Python book. And then we discussed the idea of the book. They sent me, and then 2 months later, they said they were interested, sent me a huge questionnaire that's very interesting. One of the questions that they ask is, why does the world need this book? And I said, well, because there's a lot of introductory Python books, but there are relatively few intermediate books, and the ones that exist, which are awesome, are really like David Beasley's Python Essential Reference and Python Cookbook and the Python in a Nutshell by Alex Martelli and others. But these 3 books were very outdated at the time. So I was lucky because I think one of the reasons why the book was successful is because it came at a moment when everybody was beginning to use Python 3 because of the end of life of Python 2.7 approaching. And so my book was strictly about Python 3, how to use it the best way possible. And also there were not a lot of competition in the space of an intermediate Python book.
So how long did it take from the first draft versions to completed printed edition?
Well, to printed edition, it took 2 years.
2 years.
Yes.
Great.
My work was 1.5 years, approximately. Okay. And then when I deliver, already took about 5 months, 6 months there was a period of 1 or 2 months when we were receiving feedback from the technical reviewers, and I was doing fixes, and then there was a post-production team doing fixes with my English and other things. And then the book went into production. But I worked on it for 18 months, of which 9 months I was working part-time, but then I was getting delayed because other work was calling my attention. And I had sometimes difficulty concentrating on the book when they had other demands on my work. And so O'Reilly told me that we were already reviewing the schedule for the third time. And so they kind of gave me an ultimatum. And then I told my wife that I was going to stop, because at the time I was a freelancer. So I had some savings and I didn't have a fixed job. So I told my wife I was going to stop, and then I stopped for 9 months. I did not do anything else. I really became like a monk. I didn't go to parties. I rarely drank beer. I was really like a monk to get it done. And now I am sort of in this phase, you know.
Very, very impressive.
Yes.
We all know how your book influenced Python world, and the question is how this book influenced your career.
Oh, for me it was very good, because I had always wanted to work at ThoughtWorks, but I never applied to ThoughtWorks, to work at ThoughtWorks, because...
Is it a good company?
It's a very good company, but I am 56 years old. I was 51 when I finished the book. So I was more than 50 years old, and I had more than 30 years of experience. So I wanted to be, if I wanted to join a consulting company, I would need to be a top consultant, But then if you look at what ThoughtWorks expects from a principal consultant, it's a long list of skills, and that many of them I'm not an expert, right? And so I liked ThoughtWorks. I liked the books by Martin Fowler. I admire the books of Martin Fowler, of Neil Ford, Rebecca Parsons. Well, there's several very important books in IT about continuous delivery, continuous integration, that were written by people at ThoughtWorks. So I admire the company, but I didn't have the courage to apply. But after my book was printed, they came to me. And then they were interested. Of course, I went through 6 interviews. I had to do a coding interview like every developer. But they were interested in my profile as somebody who wrote a book, as somebody who spoke publicly about technical issues. And then it became, so that was a very good effect, because ThoughtWorks supports my career as a public speaker, the same way that they support Martin Fowler's career as a public speaker and an author, right? And one of the things that I wanted to do after I joined ThoughtWorks was, I didn't want to be known only as a person who works with Python. So I started studying other languages, and I'm very proud because last year, well, since 2017 actually, I've been speaking at the National Go conference. Go is another language that I enjoy. Python is still my favorite, but I like Go as well. And so I spoke at 3 national conferences about Go. And then I spoke in Berlin last year at the Go meetup of the Go users group in Berlin. And then last year, I also spoke at an Elixir conference in Brazil. And this year, only 2 weeks ago, I spoke at the Elixir Conf US, which is the biggest Elixir Conf. I spoke there. And by the way, by coincidence, it's not a coincidence actually, but my talk there was about protocols. because they also have protocols in Elixir, although they are different from our protocols, but it's similar in a way. So yeah, so the book was important because, like I said, I would like to work for ThoughtWorks, but I didn't have the courage to apply. When the book came out, they came after me. I went through their process, and they hired me.
So the more interesting question is, what did your wife say after this long period of monk mode?
Sorry?
What did your wife say after this long period of monk mode? So I'm kidding.
Yes.
I'm kidding.
No. But I can say, I think, it's stressful for a couple, right? When one of them, maybe the man or the woman, is very focused on a project that takes more than the work hours, right? Because I am, when I dive into writing the book, I'm thinking about it all the time. So Sunday morning, I am having breakfast with my wife, and she notices that I'm distracted. It's because I'm thinking of an example for the book, So it's hard, but she managed. Our marriage survived.
Great. Luciano, what the next book do you recommend to read after Fluent Python?
Well, about after Fluent Python for Python.
Yeah.
Well, here's a thing. For instance, one of the most challenging topics for me in the first edition was the async.io part, because the library was huge and the documentation wasn't very well organized at the time. And this is a huge topic, very complicated topic. So I recommend that people, if your audience, if your community is interested in concurrent programming, I recommend it's Caleb, it's called, let me see. I think it's called async.io. Let me just get it here.
Okay.
Anyway, there's a O'Reilly book about async.io, which I think is very good, by Caleb. Where is it? Yeah, it's called Using Async.io in Python, right? So that's a whole book that was released in January of 2020. Yeah, this is the book. It has a nice green frog. Maybe it's a poisonous frog, because this whole thing of concurrency is difficult, right? But because I'm going to write only, I'm going to update the chapter, but it's going to be just one chapter. So that's one book. Oh, another book that I really like is the new book by Harry Percival.
Oh, Harry Percival. We have a book club tomorrow with him.
Oh, yeah? Well, okay, so it's... oh, this is the one.
The page is loading.
Yeah.
Yeah, now we can see.
Yeah, Enterprise Patterns with Python. Enterprise Architecture Patterns with Python. This book is extremely interesting. I haven't had the time to read it yet, but I intend to read it as soon as I finish my book. And yeah, I'm not just doing propaganda of O'Reilly books here, right? I know this book. I remember these books, so that's why I mentioned them. They happen to be by O'Reilly, but there's a couple of books that are about testing, PyTest, which are really good, and they are not by O'Reilly. There's a book by Pact and a book by pragmatic programmers about PyTest. I'm a big fan of PyTest.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Luciano. We have a couple of minutes, so I think the last question is, what's your plans for the future? Can you share something?
Yes, well, I'm going to continue to be involved with the Python community because I have a lot of friends in the Python community. But as soon as I finish this book, I want to go back to studying Elixir. Because I've studied more Go than Elixir. I started with Go, and now I studied some parts of Elixir, but I need to go deeper. I think it's a very interesting language, and both of these languages, by the way, I did not pick by accident. I picked them particularly because of concurrent programming, right? Which is something that Python is not very good at doing concurrent programming. And those languages, Go and Elixir, were created to solve concurrent programming problems very well. And but I'm also interested in learning Kotlin. I'm a friend of Bruce Eckel, who's writing a book about Kotlin. And I'm also very interested in learning programming for mobile programming, because now I never wanted to spend time learning Android or iOS as separate things. And the hybrid frameworks that existed, I didn't like them either because they use JavaScript, like React or C#, and anyway. But I like that now there's ways of doing multi-platform mobile programming using Kotlin and using Dart with the Flutter framework. So I'm going to study those things. Those are my next topics. Going back to Elixir and learning mobile programming in one of these hybrid systems, maybe Flutter or maybe Kotlin, maybe both. Those are my plans.
Great. And to have a cup of coffee after this meeting. So,
yes.
Luciano, thank you. Thank you for this meeting.
Thank you very much, Slava.
It was extremely interesting. Just for you to know, you have a lot of fans here in Russia.
Cool.
we love you.
Yes, awesome. Thank you very much. I really would like to go to Russia for a conference, but I don't know when it's going to be safe. Even for you in Russia to get somebody from Brazil.
Well, we're waiting for you. Welcome.
And vice versa. Yes. Bye-bye, Slava. Thank you so much.